A show that had historical value from the name WrestleMania alone, and in addition, a huge transition away from regular pay-per-view. WWE's goal of creating a network turned out to be a very intelligent one in hindsight, but looking back at 2014, it's insane and in some ways dumb. The name WrestleMania usually guaranteed a 1 million buy rate, but WWE hitched their wagon on an unproven network. But regardless of this WrestleMania, it was about the future, and judging by the show, that was the intention as well, to showcase the future of the WWE, a first in years. We hadn't seen the company showcase their newer stars in a major way in several years. 2014 from a distance seemed like a year for the new, unique talent coming into their own, such as The Shield and Bray Wyatt. WrestleMania was much more optimistic when compared to 29. I always used to think this event was overrated, and it's not like I randomly decided on it. I always believed this, but on the other side, I haven't watched this event in so long. So let's get into it. Okay. WrestleMania 30 was held in the Mercedes-Benz Superdome in New Orleans, Louisiana on April 6th, 2014. 60,000 fans were in attendance, and surprisingly, the buy rate was 684,000 despite the network being around. That's a huge number and almost tells you that this would have been another million-plus buy rate show. There was some interesting matches in here. Cena against a new talent in their first WrestleMania, Brock Lesnar and The Undertaker once again facing off after 11 years, and a thrilling storyline between Bryan and the Authority reaching its zenith. In some ways, I believe this was the Daniel Bryan WrestleMania. It's a show that was centered around him like crazy. The original card was much bigger and saw a focus on The Rock. Even back then, Rock was laying the smackdown on WrestleMania plans. The big rumor was that it was going to be Brock versus Rock in a rematch after 11 years. CM Punk would face Triple H, and this story had been building for months. The game would most likely give Punk his win back. The card looked depressing, and it's not just, oh, Bryan should be in the main event because I said so, but it was hundreds of thousands of fans on a weekly basis. This man was so over and popular like nobody had been in over a decade, and we just push him to the side. This wasn't even one of those internet darling push demands. You guys know, like some people want this guy to get pushed, this or that. This man's popularity transcended the internet, and I read up on his ratings from the build to WrestleMania. You know how people say this and that didn't draw? You guys know how they say it. It was literally best for business. The WrestleMania card looked terrible, and one that feels like WrestleMania 29 all over again. I will say in another world I would have been interested in seeing an Evolution triple threat, not at this WrestleMania necessarily, or even Bryan against Triple H as the champion. The game being like, none of you can do your job, and brings out the shovel for his last operation against the fans' golden boy. With that said, laissez le bon temps rouler. That might have been bad. The show kicked off with Hulk Hogan coming out. Hogan had been away from WrestleMania for about 7 years. He was once again treated like a megastar, which was exactly what he was. And if you're having the 30th WrestleMania, he's expected to be around. A lot of the fans were happy to see him, and this was a year before a certain something got leaked. Hogan was also the host of this WrestleMania. It's weird seeing him loved and adored so much in the modern era. Now, he might have been a victim of CTE because he called the stadium the Silver Dome. He's talking about body slamming Andre again and said this was about 30 years of WrestleMania moments, when all of a sudden Stone Cold interrupted. What a welcoming return. Austin made his first appearance in 3 years, and it felt like a long time. I remember his very last appearance was on a Raw episode in 2011. I didn't really expect him to disappear for that long. Two of the greatest in their respective eras, the biggest draws in wrestling history standing side by side. The What Chants were on so much steroids that the wellness policy was watching on closely. Austin had plenty of respect for Hogan and appreciated what he did for the business. If this was 1999, we all know how it would end. This night wasn't about them though, it was about the WWE wrestlers. Then to top it all off, The Rock was here. Incredible scenes to witness the three best in the same ring at the same time for the first time ever. All that was missing was unfortunately Savage and Cena, the five greats of their era, and of course WrestleMania. Maybe even Undertaker, although I don't think Savage would have been interested in standing in the same ring as Hulk Hogan once again. These three shared 17 WrestleMania main events. Now this was before Rock became senile whenever he held a mic. You know, he lost his memory and started turning heel and face during the same segment stuff. But Rock's dumbass called it the Superdome when we've always known Hogan to be right. I mean, his show is called Hogan Knows Best. Rock praised both men for their contributions towards the industry, but also for being his opponent at WrestleMania. Once again, Daniel Bryan was massively over. You're like, why are you mentioning him here? Because The Rock did. Rock's charisma shined bright here, and he completed the hat trick of WrestleMania Celebration. This was a great segment, especially for the 30th year of WrestleMania. Hogan finally got the Superdome name right, and they drank beer. Okay, with that said, the first match on the show is between Triple H and Daniel Bryan. The winner goes on to challenge for the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. The game was the final barrier and Bryan's way to the WrestleMania main event. I can't explain the love I had for Bryan in this era simply, but the reason why I really liked him was because of tenacity. He always tried to find a way. And I remember around the end of 2012, he was my favorite wrestler and always hoped he'd turn face again because that's where he's at his best. Plus, I really like the yes thing, I'm not gonna lie. But he was an underdog, always trying to break through even if destiny says otherwise. It's not often a man his size main events WrestleMania. And it's not often in general that a man becomes this over. A crowd going wild for one man like this, it hadn't been seen since the Attitude Era. And this story was a happy accident. I don't think they even considered someone could catch fire like this again, and unlike the guys previously, Bryan felt almost indestructible. His story was filled with many bumps, and these bumps were meant to derail his momentum. Every time WWE had a story with him, it involved some sort of cruel intention. He was a semi-main eventer, but they were doing a lot to keep him where he was. The plan didn't work though. Punk walked out because of his own problems, and it turned into one of the best stories that WWE did that decade. You're like, why are you mentioning CM Punk's departure? It's because that in itself kind of played a part as to why Daniel Bryan got his push. It had plenty of realism in it to the point where you question whether or not Bryan would win. It almost makes sense for Triple H to beat and eradicate him before challenging in the main event to make it an Evolution triple threat. The game already promised to shut up everyone, including his old buddies, so even though Bryan seemed like the obvious winner, it wasn't set in stone. Triple H had a very special entrance, and one of my personal favorites of his. Authority figure by day and as the night descends, a stone cold killer with nothing on his mind except the intention to end the dream of Daniel Bryan and embrace his role as the king of the WWE by becoming champion. He had Sasha Banks, Charlotte Flair, and Alexa Bliss by his side in the entrance, and they tried their best to make him seem like a threat. But he was a threat the moment the match was booked. You hear the name Triple H, you're like, oh, there's a chance he could win there. The WrestleMania was in full display here as the fans were going crazy for Daniel Bryan. The game had a very strong hold in the mental department, but that quickly changed with this roll-up. Triple H couldn't use his strength just yet and also had to deal with the aggression of Bryan. This was explained as Bryan wrestling often, whereas Triple H is part-time. So he opted to go up to the injured shoulder. This plan wasn't realized just yet though, because Daniel was fearless. He went to the well one too many times and paid the price. He did some damage to Triple H, but this ended up being a big mistake because it didn't take long for the game to find his opening. Triple H was losing his patience with a red dart on Bryan's shoulder that he almost made a critical mistake. But this turned out to be the opening Triple H looked for. He changed the entire complexion of the match, and like a vulture, Triple H's eyes were on nothing but the big weakness. He was craving this opening and was going to do everything he could to remain on top. Daniel Bryan's problem was that he was still thinking big as if it wouldn't catch up to him. The crossface did a lot of damage to Bryan, but he was trying his best to fight back. But even with the crowd behind him, Triple H was far too strong to overpower. Great German for a near fall followed by another, but the hat trick wasn't to be, and instead Triple H hit him with a release suplex. Match was good. This match was going crazy. Like, I gotta say right now. Bryan was going along and riding along from the fans' momentum, and then Triple H is like, fuck your momentum, and drops him with a clothesline that would have made Stan Hansen proud. Bryan's ring awareness shined here as he was a man that refused to be denied. But it felt like every minute Triple H found a way to kill the momentum, even when he found himself in the yes lock. High risk pays off for the American Dragon, and this is a man driven by adrenaline and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity at the WrestleMania main event. Kip up by Bryan, the momentum seemed much stronger than previously, and with every kick he was inching closer to the win. Daniel Bryan was ready to wrap it up, but just like that, Triple H hit the spine buster and pedigree counter. At this point, fans feel doubtful. They're like, maybe it's not going to be that night. 1, 2, no. Great moment. There's a lot of things I want to say about this match, but let's leave it until later. Roll-up almost gets Triple H. It got to the point where he was fighting based on emotion. This shows how far Bryan had pushed Triple H to where he wasn't thinking as smart as he usually does. Great counter to the pedigree, and Daniel Bryan was holding on for all he could to avoid it. Reversal, and off the backdrop attempt, Daniel Bryan hits the knee. 1, 2, 3. Tremendous match. These two had the perfect story here. Their storytelling ability was at its very best here, with Bryan feeling like the ultimate underdog. Triple H made him look so good with the selling and the fact that Bryan hadn't answered to almost every move of his. It was an underdog, but at the same time felt like an equal. It was storytelling 101, with Daniel walking into this match with an injury and having to deal with a fresh Triple H. And then on top of it, he got taken out after the match. Triple H decked him like Bryan went off script and changed the finish, and they were doing everything they can to make you doubt the main event. Great stuff here, great setup for the main event. See, this was excellent. This was perfect. The fact that they had Bryan face Triple H in the opener to damage him potentially for the main event, everything about it aligned perfectly. They knew what they were doing here. WWE didn't want to push him to the very top and all that, but once they understood the assignment, they did everything great. The next match was a 6-man tag team match. The New Age Outlaws and Kane faced the Shield. The heels represented the Authority, whereas the Shield finally turned face. And it was a long time coming because these guys were some of my favorites when they debuted. I loved the Shield during their original run. You probably loved the Shield during that run too because you grew up with them, you saw them as this like new talent coming around, and it felt fresh to see them as good guys because for months, WWE was teasing a split between them. The Authority's goal was to teach them a lesson, but this match went in an entirely different direction. This match is very fast-paced with an emphasis on Roman Reigns. It was by far the most explosive here. Too much was happening here, but it was basically like one of those final tests a character in a movie has before they fight tougher opposition. Roman dropped all of them with a spear and they wrapped it up with the triple powerbomb on the Outlaws. 1, 2, 3. A dismantling of the Attitude Era's strongest tag team. Or one of. I think they were the strongest in the first half, but that's not the point. Quick squash match, we didn't know it, but this was almost the end for them. And their best work as a group had yet to come despite that. Nostalgia's kind of deceiving, but when it comes to the Shield and the trio's early days as single stars, it overrides me. It's always a great thing to go back and see how hyped and excited everyone was for them. The Shield was too big to fail, and each man had something distinguishable from one another. Even Roman at the time, who was pretty green. was very explosive and intense. Dean was unpredictable, and Rollins was one of, if not the greatest aerial threat in the WWE at the time, and a well-versed competitor that didn't have a single weakness. They had the legends of the early WrestleManias to promote some of the toys. Ted DiBiase was still rich as hell, and if only his son knew. The next match was the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. They got Big Show, Sheamus, Rey Mysterio, and Cesaro in this bitch. And they actually treated it like a big deal because it was a first, but at the same time, it's like, bruh, this is full of mid-carders. Big E, The Miz, Dolph Ziggler, Kofi Kingston, The Brotherhood, all of these guys are on the match. Khali got thrown out early, and the ring started to empty with the major guys staying around, obviously. 3MB were thrown out, Henry, Miz was such a jobber that he got eliminated by Santino, and this was like the lowest point in his entire career. Justin Gabriel took a rough spot here, and this match felt so uninteresting. Fandango had the best reaction from the crowd, and they should have started the match like this. The fans would have cared more. Cesaro started to shine. He eliminated Rey, dropped Ziggler with a brutal uppercut, and almost eliminated Kofi, who barely landed on the steps. It was an incredible spot. It was just a very awkward spot to execute. Kofi had a momentum burst, but then got a brogue kick and was out. Ziggler, like his push, had something behind him, but it fizzled out, and Del Rio kicked him out of there. Ironic. Nice spot with both Del Rio and Sheamus eliminating themselves, and it was down to 2. Cesaro and Big Show. Cesaro was supposed to be the heel, but felt like a face here, with Big Show looking untouchable and unstoppable. You know, it's a big bad giant. Who's gonna stop him? Cesaro's strength was incredible here, as he just grabbed Big Show and body slammed him out of there to win the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. And people thought he would get a push. Yeah, push into the shadows. It actually looked really good for him at the time, especially when Paul Heyman associated with him the next night. But we all know how things turned out, because Cesaro was paired with Paul Heyman just for Heyman to give Brock Lesnar updates. I always shill for Battle Royals, but this didn't feel important. It was the most mid-card Battle Royal, but then again, it was always like that. The Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal was always going to be a mid-card Battle Royal unless John Cena and Randy Orton showed up. The next match was between John Cena and Bray Wyatt. A deep-rooted hatred for everything that John Cena represented caused Bray Wyatt to make him his #1 target. His entire career is a cliche. He wins all the time. The fans cheer him for winning, and he had enough of this. His main priority was to beat John Cena and in turn help him embrace his dark side. This feud had a good build because it was a fearful Cena who was going to do everything to defend his legacy. The Wyatt family were in a great position at the time, and this was Wyatt's first match at WrestleMania. He was out here facing WWE's #1 guy, John Cena. This wasn't even the later year John Cena. This was prime Cena right at the very end of his reign of dominance. One of WWE's most underrated video packages, with Eminem's Legacy playing during a video of Bray letting the world know his intentions. Great stuff. This was the first time WWE ever had an Eminem song, I believe. Bray Wyatt was very over at the time. Everything about him was unique. The band that performs his song, Mark Crozer the singer, were there to give him a special entrance, and I forgot how great of a song he had. It's old head hour, but I'm gonna say, you can't find songs like this in WWE nowadays. It's so distinctive, and it matches only one wrestler of 100 on the WWE roster, and that's Bray Wyatt. Back in my day, they actually used to have notable entrance songs. John Cena had his most normal entrance at WrestleMania here, and Wyatt was very strange. He was very strange and on his knees, begging for Cena to finish him. John Cena didn't want it that way, and Bray knew how to push Cena's buttons. Cena started going after Bray with emotion and showed that dark side that Wyatt was begging for. When have we seen this motherfucker hit a boot? You'd expect a damn bulldog or something, but this was all a part of Bray Wyatt's plan, and John Cena realized that this wasn't who he is. I mean, I noticed it wasn't who he is from the moment he hit a big boot. If it was anyone not named John Cena, they would have been like this and embraced the hate, because the hate was eating them up inside. Bray took advantage and slowed down the pace. It was a very weird match because it felt like while Bray did have the edge, it wasn't from his actual wrestling and fighting ability. It was because he let Cena hurt himself. But as always, you can't deny the inevitable. So Wyatt doubled down on the mind games and dropped Cena with a slam off the distraction. There was basically a thin line between Cena's morality and an evil side he didn't know he was capable of. And the worst part was his doubts and worries about the moves he usually uses. And these moments were what allowed Bray back into the match. He made his moments count. Cena took out Harper and Rowan, and he paid the price because it was either them or Wyatt. Cena's battle of the souls causing too many problems. He had an AA, but it wasn't enough. Harper took advantage of the referee to catch Cena with a kick. This wasn't looking good for him, and from out of nowhere, he speared him through the barricade, but this only made it easier for Wyatt. Back in the ring, Cena locked in the STF, but this didn't mean much because Bray hit Sister Abigail. He was starting to believe that Cena was that strong, a man who actually lives by the words he says. So Bray brought in a chair. Instead of using it, he handed it to Cena for the ultimate test of his morality. And the man was tempted. He used it on Rowan instead, and Wyatt was doing everything he could to end it, but Cena with an AA from out of nowhere. 1, 2, 3. And John Cena after the match couldn't believe he had endured all of this. I didn't know how to feel about this match initially. It was such a confusing realization because some elements of this match weren't that good, but on the other side, it had some amazing storytelling. So to put it simply, the action wasn't that good. I didn't like the action much. It's a reason why I was so torn on this match, but the story more than makes up for it. If the action matched the storytelling, this would be one of my favorite matches of 2014. This was John Cena at a battle with his soul. All Bray did was guide him to that point where he shows his true colors, whether those colors are good or bad, and it also helps that Cena actually sold Wyatt as some sort of devilish figure that has a hold on him. It's worth a watch to see a different version of Cena and the best version of the Embrace the Hate story that he's had thrown at him for years. So that's why I think about this match. Positive. I want to say negative even though I didn't like the action much, but that story was excellent and something I actually forgot about. Because when Cena won the match, he came out of it like, I went through this emotional roller coaster. Even then, he wasn't satisfied with the win. He was kind of scared. The next match was between The Undertaker and Brock Lesnar. Undertaker has reigned atop WrestleMania for over 20 years. It was 2 decades of dominance with no end in sight. In some ways, The Undertaker was WrestleMania. No matter how bad the card was, there was always his match to look forward to. The looming threat of his streak at Danger provided a thrill like no other. Brock Lesnar's return had been strange. It felt like he had to pay his dues before getting a huge push. Funny enough, by this point he had gone through the bad parts of his run because from here on, he was gonna fly high. There was no real consideration of the streak ending. I think we all thought that The Undertaker would win here, but we saw how it ended. And this was probably the longest Undertaker entrance I've seen, and that's saying something because this guy was walking so damn slow. I actually forgot he had an entrance during the whole thing. Right when the bell rang, Undertaker came in with all the intensity. He overwhelmed Brock for a single moment because from there, Brock hit a belly to belly. Undertaker felt like he had mismatched Brock because he was very overwhelming. Lesnar was super aggressive with his strikes and knees, and early on, Undertaker went after Brock's shoulder. The pace was very slow and it was Brock who was struggling here. It felt like the pace was about to quicken, but then it was back to the slow action after Brock targeted the right leg. I found myself looking at the wall for a moment because this match wasn't hitting. Brock did a number on that knee. The problem with this match is that we expected a kick-ass encounter like the previous ones, but it wasn't that. Suplex in the ring and Brock was circling in on a monumental victory. There was a moment where Undertaker suffered a concussion. I believe it was a spot on the outside, but that's where things got weird. Undertaker finally did a spot with the DDT off the ropes and he built momentum and even hit the choke slam with Lesnar doing a crazy jump to sell it better. Brock responded with an F5 which got him a 2 count. I don't know if it's the fact that Undertaker looked like deadweight, but the sound was devastating. From out of nowhere, Lesnar found himself in Hell's Gate. He decided to use his strength and slam him to the mat. The method did some damage to Brock, so he did it again. And it was the same story. Lesnar had the edge at this point because Undertaker could barely stand. Brock locked in the Kimura, and on paper there should be a lot of heat and interest here, but there wasn't. There was a lack of energy in the arena. I don't know if it's because the stadium's big, you can't hear as much or whatever, but judging by the match, it wasn't hitting. Undertaker reversed the hold, and while he did some damage to Brock, it wasn't much. Brock still had a lot of fight despite being worn out and beaten. Undertaker attempted old school, but Brock pulled him down and hit a second F5. 1, 2, no. Lesnar went back to the German suplexes. Heyman continued to instill belief in Brock to end it and be the one. Brock should have known not to beat up Undertaker in a corner because he took a weak looking last ride and then a tombstone pile driver. 1, 2, no. This didn't work, so he tried again, but Brock countered into an F5. 1, 2, 3. Stunning result. I've got goosebumps writing this. It felt like the air was sucked out of that stadium. A record that crowd knew for most of their life, time after time. The Undertaker would win. And watching it with the whole match going down, it almost feels like a fake scenario they booked inside of a dream. Everything about this was surreal. One of the craziest results and outcomes in wrestling history. It's one thing to see the moment on a YouTube video, but it's another to watch the match go down and see how it transpired. It's kind of sad, but not every result in wrestling is going to give you a high. This did give you a high, but in a very different way. Lesnar mastered what nobody could in 21 years. From dominating Undertaker throughout the entire match to no selling the legend of WrestleMania Undertaker. You can't sell this moment. I can't sell this moment because it was a million times shocking the day it happened. And the thing is, while WrestleMania is WrestleMania, it lost something when the Undertaker's streak ended. Now with that said, this match was weak. Undertaker suffered a concussion early on. It wasn't in the best shape and actually doesn't even remember losing to Brock. He was hospitalized shortly after the match with Brock and Vince going to the hospital with him, and it just wasn't a good time for him. Undertaker said in an interview that he was originally going to win this match, but they changed the plans. He also intended for this to be a retirement match, but because the performance was so bad, not to mention that he doesn't even remember the performance, he opted to stay around. Brock winning always has its detractors, but I believe that if the streak ever ended, it should always go to someone who was guaranteed to be a main eventer, no matter what, because what good does it do for someone like Bray Wyatt to beat him or go on to have a very underwhelming year? It doesn't matter who ended it, just that the person who did was either an icon such as Cena, Triple H, Brock, or they were going to be guaranteed to be on top such as Roman Reigns. A lot of people would have had a big problem with Cena or Triple H ending it. I still think it should be Roman Reigns that ended it. Roman was the perfect foil felt by Wyatt at the time, but Brock wasn't a terrible choice. He had legitimacy and wasn't going to be a guy they'd forget about in a year. I really like Brock's 2014 year. It's just the end goal was short-sighted with Roman being the only guy they considered to beat him. The next match was the Vicky Guerrero Invitational. AJ Lee defended the Divas Championship against the whole roster. The crowd at one point was so silent, stunned by the results of the last match, and about this one, the action was all over the place. The Bellas shined here, fought each other at one moment, and I forgot how brutal Nikki's finisher was, the torture rack. Natalya had her moment, Tamina, Naomi, but AJ stole it from out of nowhere with a Black Widow. At this point, she was one of the longest reigning Divas champion with no end in sight. This was a throwaway match which was just about bringing in as many women into a single match. It's important to mention that nobody was portrayed as a strong rival of AJ's at the time to have a singles match. Maybe Nikki Bella, but the Divas division would get a very major star the next night on Raw. It was a flashback to WrestleMania 1's main event with Orndorff, Piper, Hogan, and Mr. T all in the same room. They buried the hatchet after nearly 30 years, although they don't want you to remember that Orndorff teamed up with Hogan after WrestleMania 1. And the main event, Randy Orton defends the WWE World Heavyweight Championship against Batista and Daniel Bryan. Bryan, heading into this match, took a significant amount of damage. Triple H wanted to ensure one of his investments stand on top in the main event, and at this point, the leader of the Yes Movement didn't have much of a chance against these two. The crowd saw it all that night, but even then, they were still all in on Bryan, as if it was the beginning of the night. Bryan was vicious and aggressive. He knew that the adrenaline wasn't going to be around for long, and all it took was one strike to the arm for him to go down. Orton and Batista focused on each other while Bryan was recuperating on the outside. This was a smart strategy for Orton because it meant Batista was out of the equation, allowing for him to fully focus on the wounded challenger. Once Bryan came in, he opted to use those kicks to inflict damage. Despite his injuries, it wasn't all so bad for him. He would disappear and come back at a moment's notice. Yes, lock on Orton, but then the Authority came out. The same story Bryan had endured for 7 months, and off the distraction, Batista hit the spine buster before the corrupt referee came in. Batista bomb. 1, 2, no. It felt like Bryan rediscovered his momentum, and it was all because of the fans. This was no disqualification, so Bryan knocked down the referee and the entire Authority. This was the first time Stephanie got her comeuppance, and Triple H had enough. This backfired in a huge way, and the crowd was going insane. This was the loudest they had been since the streak ended. At this point, the heels had enough. Batista and Orton were fed up with Bryan coming back over and over again, so they decided to take him out and become Evolution for a moment. There was a CM Punk chant at one point, which obviously wasn't going to lead to much, but you know the fans. And these two, they had a ridiculous SmackDown vs. Raw create a finisher-ass move that ended Bryan's hopes. This also did a number on Randy Orton, and Batista took advantage. Batista was staring at Bryan, knowing that he'd have him if it was in the ring, but he was unconscious and he was basically out of the match. Orton rebounded with a brutal DDT on the outside, and Daniel Bryan on the other side was fighting his way back to the ring. This was a formality though. Orton threw him into the steps and back in the ring. The fans were trying their best to rattle Orton, but he was as composed as they come. RKO was countered into the yes lock. Orton was overwhelmed with the hold, but it was Batista who saved him, only to find himself in the same hold. Orton made the save. Got his RKO countered, and Batista speared Bryan right out of the match. There it was, the RKO. Fans were let down, but surprisingly, Batista kicked out. And again, this was a very exciting match. It was something that was befitting of a WrestleMania main event. Now, if that didn't work, he wanted to become a national threat again with the Punk. He's having flashbacks to 2009. Bryan with the knee makes a save, but Batista takes advantage. This didn't work though, and he followed up with a Batista bomb. From out of nowhere, Daniel Bryan came in with a knee and locked in the yes lock. At this point, it was his best opportunity. The fans were believing. Michael Cole, a strong hater of Bryan's, who prayed for his downfall on multiple occasions throughout the years, was hoping he'd win, and Batista had no other choice but to tap out. The 6-month journey filled with doubts, complaints, twists, and turns finally culminates. It was an insane story because it accidentally became the perfect conclusion. That's what makes it crazy. And they never intended for this to be the end. It was going to be Bryan and Sheamus. Batista would most likely win here, and the fans would have turned on it like crazy. WWE wouldn't have scripted like this if it was the original plan. They couldn't have done this as good as it was if that was the main intention. Bryan would have won the Rumble. That would have been how he got the title shot. But instead, it was the toughest path to a title main event a wrestler had to endure. Kept away from the Rumble, screwed over in the chamber, beating the game, and having to challenge the two most dangerous wrestlers in the WWE on the same night. Tremendous. The match itself was one I watched and was like, I thought this was great years ago. But then it started to pick up, and the fans brought the energy right when Bryan started building momentum, and I was glad it turned out that way because I was like, do not make me dislike this match. I thought it was overrated for a moment. Good thing that it wasn't the case, because I wouldn't want my memory of this match tarnished. Like, it was a special moment then, but as a match, you obviously had to look at it from a different perspective. But it was a great one. It was booked well, with Triple H and the Authority throwing everything they can at Bryan, Batista and Randy Orton being tough opposition. It made Daniel Bryan's win that much sweeter. So yeah, alright, that's WrestleMania 30. This event was very weird, to be honest. Do I think it's still overrated? Honestly, yes. I'm not gonna lie to you guys and be like, oh, I changed my opinion. No, not much has changed. Although I did get sucked into the WrestleMania vibe with the whole New Orleans, the purple aesthetic, everything about it. I think that's what makes this event feel special. Other than that, for a moment, you have two great moments in Daniel Bryan, and of course the streak ending, so maybe that's why a lot of people consider it one of the best. The show did pass, I enjoyed it. It wasn't bad at all. It's just I think it's a bit overrated. I prefer WrestleMania 31, but that's my personal perspective. Other than that, this was the Daniel Bryan WrestleMania. They did everything they could to make him look like a megastar here, and it worked. It was a spectacular ending to the show, and one that established him as the top guy in WWE, at least for a short time. It was nice to see Bray Wyatt around, the Shield. You saw these guys and you're like, these guys are gonna be the stars of the future. And in some ways they were. At the time, we didn't know how different things would have been for the Shield just 3 months later. So yeah. Alright, that's WrestleMania 30. Solid event. If Undertaker's streak never ended, I think people would look at this WrestleMania a bit differently. I didn't think it was as stacked as 31, but it had a great vibe to it. It was a great vibe. 2 great moments, and one that was very shocking, one of the most shocking in wrestling history, with the streak ending. So there's that. Alright, what'd you guys think of WrestleMania 30? Please comment down below. That's it for this video. And make sure you hit the F5 on the like button, or perhaps the yes lock on the subscribe button. Peace. I'm out.